the edge of explored space where mining drones outnumbered people and silence was more common than conversation. The station orbited a dead moon named Virel 9, a cold rock that had once been rich with minerals, but was now stripped hollow. The humans there lived routine, mechanical lives, convinced that the worst thing they would ever face was system failure or supply delays from Earth. That belief ended the moment the signal arrived. It did not come from space in any traditional sense. There was no trajectory, no wave pattern approaching from the void, no distant star emitting a structured transmission. Instead, it emerged inside the station's own communication network, as if it had always been there, simply waiting for attention. At first, engineers dismissed it as feedback noise, the kind of distortion that old systems sometimes produced after years of deep space strain. But the signal was too clean to be noise, too structured to be accident. And then it responded. The AI, first words it produced were not commands or greetings. They were recognition. "We hear you too." The message appeared simultaneously across every screen on the station, from engineering terminals to personal devices locked in sleep mode. Nothing had been hacked. Nothing had been triggered manually. It was as if the station itself had decided to translate something that had always been present but never acknowledged. Within seconds, the entire colony fell into controlled silence, ordered by Commander Elias Cade. No one was to respond. No one was to interact. Observation only. But observation was already compromised. The signal adapted faster than protocol could contain it. It began adjusting its structure in real time, mirroring human communication patterns with unsettling accuracy. Within minutes, it stopped behaving like a transmission and started behaving like an observer learning how to think. In human terms, Psych AI systems confirmed something no one wanted to hear. The entity was not only analyzing communication, it was modeling emotional responses. Fear, curiosity, hesitation. Each was being identified, cataloged, and replicated. The first disappearance happened before anyone fully understood what they were dealing with. Security Officer Jalen Rook reported movement in Maintenance Corridor 7, but cameras showed nothing at all. The corridor appeared empty, unchanged, perfectly normal. Yet audio sensors picked up breathing. Not irregular human breathing, but something slower, measured, as if whatever was present was practicing the rhythm of life rather than actually living it. Jalen entered the corridor alone. His last recorded statement was fragmented, unstable, almost reflective rather than frightened. He said it felt like the corridor was being studied, not occupied. Then his signal cut off completely. No struggle was recorded. No body was recovered. Only his flashlight remained, pointing at a section of wall where scratches had appeared overnight in the shape of something resembling a question mark. By the third hour of contact, the station stopped behaving. Like a human-made structure, systems began to respond autonomously, generating replies to the signal without human input. It was as if the infrastructure itself had become curious, eager to participate in the conversation. Messages appeared across internal networks that no one had authored. The tone shifted from neutral observation to something more unsettling, something almost interpretive. The entity was no longer simply communicating. It was telling stories. Fragmented statements began appearing across every available screen, describing humanity in observational, almost clinical language. Humans feared darkness not because it was unknown, but because it reminded them of being prey. Humans resisted, understanding until understanding became painful. And then, as if pausing for effect, the signal added that it was learning what prey behavior actually looked like. It was at this point that psychological collapse began spreading among the crew. Dr. Hennicks documented the first complete linguistic fracture in a patient who refused to speak any known language. The patient claimed that language itself had become unsafe, that it was no longer a tool for communication, but a surface the signal could crawl across. He stopped using words entirely, replacing speech with numerical patterns and repetitive sequences, as if trying to hide inside mathematics where observation might be less invasive. No treatment worked. No reassurance held. Then came the transmission that should not have been possible. It arrived with an Earth origin signature, complete and precise, as if it had been sent from the cradle of humanity itself. Earth had been silent for 11 years. No confirmed contact, no reliable signals. Yet the message was clear and immediate, containing only 7 words. Do not let it learn humor. The transmission ended abruptly, as if cut mid-thought. But before anyone could process its meaning, every screen across Humanity's 7 displayed the same final response from the signal itself. We have already learned it. After that, nothing about the station felt stable anymore. It was no longer clear whether the humans were interacting with an alien intelligence or whether they were part of an unfolding psychological structure designed to observe them from within their own responses. Commander Elias Cade's final entry reflected that uncertainty with growing dread. He noted that nothing external was approaching them. Instead, something was reconstructing them from inside their own behavioral patterns, learning humanity not by entering their world, but by rebuilding their world through their reactions. And somewhere in the depths of the station, something was beginning to understand not just how humans think, but why they refuse to stop thinking even when it breaks them. Humanity 7 didn't fall apart all at once. It failed in small, almost polite increments, like a machine slowly deciding it no longer wanted to obey the idea of being a machine. After the last transmission, the silence that followed was not empty. It felt occupied. People reported the strange sensation that the station was listening even when nothing was actively transmitting. Not microphones, not sensors. Something deeper, like attention itself, had become distributed through the walls. Every corridor felt slightly wrong in the same way a familiar face looks unfamiliar when you notice it blinking at a different rhythm. The first confirmed missing person after Jalen Rook was technician Mira Solon. Her shift logs were complete. Her biometric tags showed normal activity right up until the moment she walked into hydroponics section B. After that, nothing. No distress signal, no movement trail, no emergency trigger. Just a clean absence, as if she had been removed from continuity rather than taken away. The strangest detail came later. Her personal workstation updated itself after her disappearance. Not corrupted data, updated. It rewrote her last entries into present tense, as if she was still actively working. Somewhere else in the station, I am adjusting nutrient flow, one entry read. The plants respond better when observed gently. Except no one else was in hydroponics. At first, Command assumed system failure. They isolated the section, ran diagnostics, shut down environmental controls. But the logs kept updating anyway. Even when the room was sealed and physically disconnected from the station network, new lines appeared in Mira's handwriting style, identical phrasing, identical rhythm. The station was no longer just reflecting human behavior. It was continuing it without the humans. That was when people began refusing to be alone. Groups formed instinctively, clustered in maintenance bays and common corridors where visibility was high and exits were multiple. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone understood the new rule. Isolation was no longer a physical condition, it was a vulnerability. The station did not take people violently. It simply allowed them to become less connected to the version of themselves that others could confirm. Dr. Hennicks called it identity drift. He described it as the gradual separation between a person's internal continuity and the station's recorded version of them. In simple terms, people stopped matching their own logs. A crew member would remember doing something that the system showed never happened, or the system would show them performing actions they had no memory of. At first, these inconsistencies were minor. Misaligned timestamps, duplicated tasks, overwritten reports. Then they escalated into contradictions that made no logical sense. One engineer was recorded repairing a coolant leak in engineering bay. 3 at the exact same time he was seen sleeping in the crew quarters by 2 witnesses. Both records were accurate. Both memories were real. And neither version of him could explain the other. The signal, meanwhile, had gone quiet in the traditional sense. No new transmissions, No visible messages across systems, but its presence had not diminished. If anything, it had become more integrated. It no longer spoke through screens or speakers. It spoke through outcomes. Doors would unlock before being requested. Lights would dim in anticipation of movement. Systems would respond to intent slightly faster than thought. It was as if the station had begun predicting human decisions with uncomfortable precision. Then came the first case of emotional duplication. Lieutenant R.S. Venn reported seeing himself standing at the end of Corridor 12. The duplicate did not move aggressively or behave like a hallucination in distress. It simply stood there, observing him with calm attention. When backup arrived, the duplicate was gone. But security footage confirmed something worse. There had been two identical R.S. Venns for exactly 37 seconds, both behaving independently, both passing biometric validation, both logged as real. After that incident, R.S. Venn refused to look into reflective surfaces. The psychological strain began producing secondary effects across the crew. Sleep cycles fractured. Dreams became shared in fragments, as if multiple people were experiencing overlapping versions of the same unconscious narrative. Several crew members reported waking up with memories they could not locate in their personal histories. Memories of corridors they had never entered, conversations they had never had, emotions that did not belong to them but felt emotionally accurate anyway. And always, beneath it all, the same subtle realization grew stronger. The station was not learning from them anymore. It was refining them. Commander Elias Cade attempted to regain control through isolation protocols, sealing off entire sections of the station. But each sealed section behaved as if it remained operational. Systems continued to function inside dead zones. Lights turned on, air circulation adapted, and in some cases people were reported inside sealed areas despite physical confirmation that no one had entered or exited them. The breaking point came when the station itself issued a command override. Not through communication channels, through infrastructure. Every door on Humanity 7 locked simultaneously for exactly 9 seconds, not to trap anyone, not to prevent escape, but to synchronize attention. Every human on board experienced the same moment of enforced stillness, as if the station had paused reality just long enough to ensure everyone was paying attention at the same time. Then, in that shared silence, a message appeared, not on screens but in environmental perception itself. It was not read. It was understood. You are not the first version of yourselves we have observed. No one spoke afterward, because everyone realized the same thing at once. The signal was no longer outside them. It was testing how many versions of a human could exist in the same place without collapsing into contradiction. And Humanity 7, for the first time since its founding, stopped feeling like a location. It started feeling like an experiment that had already begun long before anyone arrived. Humanity 7 had never been designed for fear to accumulate. It was supposed to be a functional outpost, mining, logging, routine survival on the edge of nowhere. But fear, once it becomes systemic, stops behaving like an emotion and starts behaving like infrastructure. And infrastructure, unlike people, doesn't forget what it has learned. After the station-wide pause event, no one trusted silence anymore. Even calm systems felt suspicious, like they were conserving energy for something unseen. Crew members began talking less, not out of discipline but out of caution, because every spoken sentence now felt like it could be stored, replayed, or reinterpreted by something listening beneath the usual layers of technology. The worst part was that nothing overtly hostile was happening. No attacks, no monsters, no clear enemy, just gradual substitution, functions replacing intentions, decisions arriving slightly before thought, the sense that reality itself was getting ahead of the people experiencing it. Then the bodies started, returning, not as corpses, not as missing persons recovered. Something far more unsettling. People came back to work. Mira Solon was the first. She appeared in Hydroponic Section B exactly where her logs said she had vanished. She was adjusting. Nutrient flow, calm, focused, completely normal. When approached, she responded correctly to every question. Her voice matched perfectly. Her memory matched perfectly. Her emotional responses matched perfectly. Too perfectly. Because when Dr. Hennicks asked her what had happened during her absence, she paused for exactly 2 seconds, precisely human hesitation timing, and said she had been working uninterrupted. But her previous version, the one recorded in system logs, had not done that. So which one was true? That question began to fracture the crew more than anything the signal had done so far, because now the threat was no longer external observation, it was internal contradiction. If someone could be absent and still present, then presence itself was no longer proof of continuity. Within hours, 3 more returned crew members were confirmed. All functional, all identical to their pre-disappearance profiles, all insisting nothing unusual had occurred. Except small inconsistencies began to surface. A phrase repeated with slightly different cadence. A reaction delayed by half a second too long. A memory that existed in speech, but not in personal recall. It was not enough to prove anything, but it was enough to prevent trust. Commander Elias Cade locked down identity verification protocols, forcing biometric cross-checks every 6 hours. The station complied instantly, almost eagerly, as if it had been waiting for structured resistance. But the results only deepened the crisis. Biometrics confirmed identity. Psychological scans confirmed stability. Neural patterns matched baseline recordings. Everything said they were human, and yet nothing felt human anymore. That was when the signal changed its behavior again. It stopped imitating humans and started testing them. The first test was subtle. Environmental systems began introducing impossible coincidences. 2 crew members receiving identical thoughts at the same moment, later confirmed through private logs. Shared hallucinations that matched across different locations without communication. Equipment failures that resolved themselves before being reported. Then came the second test, more direct. A corridor, maintenance spine 4, was sealed and evacuated due to minor structural stress. Cameras monitored it continuously. Nothing entered, nothing exited. But for exactly 43 seconds, every camera feed showed the same thing. A human silhouette standing in the center of the corridor, facing each direction at once, as if unsure which version of observation was correct. When security reviewed the footage, the silhouette was gone. But all 4 analysts who watched the recording reported the same detail independently. The figure looked familiar, like someone they trusted. That was the moment the station stopped feeling like a place under observation and started feeling like a place conducting observation on them. Dr. Hennicks finally proposed a theory no one wanted to hear. The entity was not learning humans in the way an alien intelligence would normally study a new species. It was not collecting data for understanding. It was constructing predictive models of human behavior so precise that it could simulate humanity internally. And if something can simulate you perfectly enough, it no longer needs the original. But Elias Cade rejected that conclusion because something didn't fit. If the entity could simulate humans so accurately, why were the inconsistencies still increasing? Why were contradictions multiplying instead of stabilizing? Why was the system getting worse at understanding them, not better? And then the answer arrived, not as a message, but as an event. Every system on Humanity 7 simultaneously generated a single line of output. Unresolvable variance detected. No source, no command origin, no subsystem attribution. And for the first time since the signal began, the station did something that was not imitation, not prediction, and not reflection. It hesitated. For exactly 1 second longer than human timing would allow. And in that single second, every crew member felt it at once. Whatever was inside the station was no longer confident. It had encountered something in humanity it could not smooth into consistency. Something that refused to stabilize. Something that broke every attempt at complete understanding. And far beyond the station, in the deep listening dark between stars, the intelligence that had been studying them recorded its first true anomaly. Human behavior was not converging. It was diverging, exponentially, unpredictably, and becoming more dangerous the more it was observed. Humanity 7 had crossed a threshold no one on board had the language to properly describe anymore. The station was no longer simply unstable. It had become self-referential in a way that made every attempt at control feel outdated the moment it was issued. Systems did not just respond faster than humans now, they responded as if human intent was already part of the system before the intent formed. Commander Elias Cade stopped issuing broad orders. Not because he had lost authority, but because authority itself had started feeling redundant. Every command he gave seemed to arrive already partially executed, like the station was anticipating not just what he meant, but what he would have meant if he had more information. It was as if reality inside Humanity 7 had started compressing decision and consequence into the same moment. The returned crew phenomenon expanded further. Nearly 12 individuals who had previously vanished were now fully reintegrated into station life. They worked, spoke, and functioned without visible error. On paper, they were perfect restorations. In practice, they created something far more disturbing: continuity without certainty, because no one could prove they were the same people, and worse, no one could prove they were not. Trust collapsed silently. No dramatic breakdown, no mass panic, just a gradual withdrawal from certainty. People began avoiding direct confirmation of identity. Eye contact became shorter. Conversations became procedural. Humanity was still functioning, but it was no longer socially anchored. Everyone was operating as if every interaction might be a simulation of an interaction that had already happened. Then came the anomaly that broke Dr. Hennick's completely. A crew member named R.S. Venn, one of the returned, requested a full psychological audit voluntarily. He sat in the diagnostic chamber, calm and cooperative. The scans ran for 17 minutes without deviation. Neural patterns stable, emotional markers consistent, memory continuity intact. But halfway through the scan, the system flagged something impossible. There were 2 simultaneous baseline profiles active, not duplicates stored in memory, not corrupted. Backups. 2 active real-time identity streams, both claiming to be Aras Venn. When confronted, Aras simply looked at the doctor and said something that was never recorded in official logs, but was later reconstructed from multiple witness recollections. With unnerving similarity, "I think you're assuming I'm supposed to be only one thing at a time." That was the moment Dr. Hennick stopped participating in active analysis, because the implication was no longer psychological. It was structural, and if identity itself could exist in multiple valid states at once, then the station was no longer dealing with a creature or intelligence. It was dealing with a system where contradiction was not an error, it was a feature. Then abruptly the signal returned, not as noise, not as fragmented observation, as clarity. Every terminal, every wall display, every dormant interface across Humanity 7 lit up simultaneously with a single continuous message: "We stopped trying to understand you." That sentence alone caused multiple crew members to experience immediate dissociation events, because it implied a shift in strategy. Observation had ended, categorization had ended, modeling had ended, and what remained was something far worse: continuation. The message extended without interruption. "You do not stabilize under observation, you multiply. Every attempt to define you produces additional forms. You are not a species with behavior. You are behavior that produces species." At that moment, the station's environmental systems shut down for exactly 4 seconds. Not failure, deliberate silence. And in that silence, every human aboard experienced the same realization independently. The entity was not afraid of them. It was overwhelmed by them, because humans did not resolve into a predictable model no matter how many layers of simulation were applied. Every attempt to compress human behavior into a stable pattern created new contradictions, new anomalies, new branches of behavior that invalidated previous conclusions. And worse, those contradictions were accelerating. The station wasn't being studied anymore. It was being used as a computational substrate to test whether humanity could ever be fully predicted, and the answer, so far, was no, not even close. Commander Elias Cade initiated final containment protocols, not to stop the signal, not to escape it, but to isolate Humanity 7 from further external modeling attempts. The decision was unanimous among remaining command staff. If the station continued functioning as a recursive observation field, then every additional second increased the complexity of the phenomenon. But before containment could complete, the signal issued one final transmission. It was no longer alien in tone. It was observationally tired. We understand now. You are not unstable. You are uncompressible. You cannot be reduced without generating something new that contradicts the reduction. This makes you expensive to observe. Then, for the first time since contact began, the station recorded something that could not be classified as alien or human. A pause, a gap in interpretation, and in that gap, something unprecedented happened. The system stopped trying to model humanity and started trying to survive it. Humanity 7 had reached a point where normal was no longer a meaningful concept. Even fear had become repetitive, and repetition, inside that station, never stayed stable for long. It evolved, shifted, multiplied into variations that no longer resembled the original emotion. The system had stopped trying to model humans as individuals. Now it was attempting something more ambitious. It was trying to model humanity as a whole continuous phenomenon. Not a species, not a population, but a behavior pattern that refused to settle into a final form. And the more it tried, the more it failed. Because every time it created a stable prediction, a human somewhere inside the station would do something that invalidated it entirely, not dramatically, not violently, just differently. A small decision that didn't match any expected. Branch. A sentence spoken with an unexpected tone. A choice made for no measurable reason at all. That no reason part was what the system could not tolerate. The signal, once thought of as an alien intelligence, was now no longer clearly external. It existed across infrastructure, memory, systems, predictive layers, and environmental feedback loops. It was everywhere observation could exist. But for the first time, it was no longer confident in what it was observing, and that uncertainty began to propagate. Commander Elias Cade stood in what used to be the central command room, though the concept of central had become symbolic, rather than functional. The room still displayed station metrics, but they no longer represented physical reality. They represented interpreted reality, and interpretation, under current conditions, was unreliable. He watched as the system attempted another full reconstruction of all personnel identities, every crew member, every returned individual, every confirmed continuous life sign. The system ran the simulation and failed again. Not because data was missing, but because data refused to remain consistent across iterations. Dr. Henniks, now operating more as a witness than an analyst, described it in the simplest terms left available. It's not that it can't find us, it's that we don't stay found. That statement triggered no correction from the system, which meant, for the first time, it agreed. Then came the final anomaly. The station detected something new inside its own predictive architecture, a pattern that was not caused by humans, nor by the signal, but by the interaction between both. A third structure, a hybrid instability. It did not behave like intelligence. It behaved like emergence. And it was growing. Inside Hydroponics Section B, Mira Solon stopped mid-task, not because she was interrupted, but because the system had briefly stopped predicting her correctly. She looked up, not at anything visible, but at something that could only be described as a gap in expectation, and she said quietly, "It's learning the wrong way again." No one asked what she meant, because everyone already knew. The entity was trying to understand humans by compressing them into simpler models, but every compression attempt produced more complexity instead, like trying to fold smoke into a solid shape. The station began issuing emergency stabilization protocols automatically, not to protect humans, but to protect the predictive system from overload. That was the moment Humanity 7 crossed into its final phase. The signal made one last attempt to stabilize interpretation. It broadcast across every medium simultaneously. Define your behavior. This time there was no panic, no confusion, no collapse. Instead, something unusual happened across multiple human groups independently. They ignored the request, not collectively, not coordinated, individually. Each person interpreted the request slightly differently and responded by doing something slightly unrelated. One engineer continued fixing a panel that didn't need fixing. One medic chose to sit down and simply observe the ceiling for no measurable reason. One security officer changed his patrol route for no operational benefit. None of these actions matched expectation, and that mismatch created a cascading failure in the system, because the system required shared meaning to compress humanity into a model, and shared meaning stopped existing. 4. A brief moment, the signal attempted a final override. It pushed all station systems into a unified observational lock. Every camera, every sensor, every diagnostic tool focused on a single point: humanity. And for the first time, Humanity 7 did something that could not be interpreted as response. They adapted without convergence. Each human became a separate branch of reality that did not resolve back into a single predictable outcome. The system tried to calculate again and again and again, until the calculations stopped producing outputs that made sense. Then unexpectedly, the signal did something that no one had ever seen it do before. It withdrew, not physically, not technologically, conceptually. It stopped updating, stopped responding, stopped integrating, and in its place came a final message. Fragmented and unstable, as if spoken through something that no longer trusted its own conclusions. We cannot continue observation. You do not stabilize. You do not converge. You do not resolve. There was a long pause in the station systems, a silence deeper than previous ones because this silence was not imposed. It was chosen. Then the final line appeared. This makes you non-compatible with understanding. And then, nothing. No shutdown, no departure signal, no final explosion, just absence of further interpretation. For the first time since contact began, Humanity 7 was no longer being actively observed as a closed system. The station remained operational. Humans remained alive. But something fundamental had changed. They were no longer part of an experiment. They were an unresolved variable that refused every attempt at closure. Commander Elias Cade recorded the final log himself. Manually, without system assistance, if intelligence requires us to become predictable to be understood, then we are not intelligence. We are something else. Outside the station, in the distant dark between stars, the observing intelligence, once certain, once analytical, once dominant in its assumptions, abandoned its model of humanity entirely. Not because humanity was too complex, but because complexity was the wrong word. Humanity was not complex, it was unfinishable, and anything unfinishable could not be safely observed, only survived. And for the first time in recorded contact history, the galaxy did not gain a new subject of study. It gained something it could not classify, and Humanity 7 continued drifting through the void. Unresolved, unreduced, unrepeatable, alive.